What's going on, CDL fans? As you may have saw on Twitter last week, we now know the locations or the most likely locations for our majors this coming CDL season. And now that we generally know when the first major is going to be, I want to talk about when I think the season is actually going to start. And then, of course, we can talk about these majors as well real quick, just to touch on them. All this broke from the rotation last week on October 19th. Not even really last week, honestly. It was only like a few days ago, but still. Their sources are saying that CDL season is going to kick off with Major 1 in Barcelona. First up, that's actually super dope. We got another EU event. I know the UK people, it's much closer than an NA event, but people still want an event in the UK. Maybe we'll get one day, but Major 1 in Barcelona is super awesome. There was allegedly supposed to be a kickoff event in Anaheim, California, which is no longer the plan. Obviously, right? We can't trust Activision to do pretty much anything that we actually want. So kickoff event is not going to be happening. Unfortunately, no kickoff event in Anaheim. And the Major 1 in Barcelona is scheduled for the end of January, early February, which we're going to touch on in a little bit because this obviously will help us determine when we think the season is going to start. The event is also not hosted by the Miami Heretics, despite them being, the Spanish organization in the league, and Barcelona being in Spain, if you're not good at geography and didn't already know. But it's most likely going to be hosted by Toronto/Koi. But this also is interesting, and we're going to touch on this in a second. The rotation sources also said that our other events this year are going to be in Miami, Dallas, and Toronto. This is where it gets a little bit interesting and maybe slightly confusing, right? Miami, this will probably end up actually being in Fort Lauderdale, maybe at the same venue this past major that was hosted by Miami was in 2024 season. Dallas, this could be at the same venue that Champs was held. This could be in somewhere in downtown Dallas. This could be maybe in Arlington. It's not really, clear as to where the actual venues are going to be. We just kind of know the general cities. But I would imagine this one is going to be hosted by OPTIC. And then this one is where it kind of gets interesting because if there's going to be an event in Toronto, but then we also think that Toronto is hosting the Barcelona event, does that mean Toronto is hosting two events? Because that sounds kind of expensive, especially being as they were clearly having financial difficulties. They sold Scrap, they sold Envoy, they were willing to sell Kleenex and Insight, it seems, and apparently Kleenex and Insight took pay cuts to stay on the team. So I'm not really sure what's going on with Toronto on the finance side of things, but they might be hosting two events. That's the biggest confusion for me is are they hosting two events? Is someone helping them host this? Is the league co-hosting it? I don't really know how this is going to work, but it looks like Major 2, Major 3, Major 4, or in some order, these are going to be our second, third, and fourth majors. The rotation also said there was potentially a fifth event this year in Chicago. Now, it is important to note that it says fifth event, not fifth major, which means Champs could potentially being held. Well, I can't talk today. Champs might be being held in Chicago, which for one is obviously a neutral ground, right? We don't have a current Chicago franchise. I'm sure people are going to cry OPTIC cheese again because they were the, the OPTIC Chicago Huntsman at one point a few years ago. Being as this says fifth event, not fifth major, looks like maybe Champs is going to be in Chicago. And as you can see here from CDL Scrim Intel, they said 4 majors and Champs is the current plan. So my guy OPTIC Texas Burner down here kind of laying it out. Who knows exactly the order of these 3 majors in between? Maybe it's in this order. It looks like we might be having 5 events, right? EWC as well, so technically 6 events. But Barcelona, Miami, Dallas, Toronto, and Chicago. But now let's talk about when the league will actually start, because I think this is potentially the most interesting, important thing, what we're all looking forward to, right? It's cool to know when the majors are, but if we don't actually know when the season's going to start, it's kind of what we want to know. So looking at the year, this past season, the first week of qualifiers, I gotta scroll down. Oh no, I gotta click on qualifiers, my bad. The first week of qualifiers, the very first match was Atlanta FaZe versus Boston Breach on December 8th. Now, it's very possible for the league to start at pretty much the exact same time as this past season. I mean, the major last year, Major 1, was held in Boston on January 25th to January 28th. So slightly earlier than what's predicted for this upcoming season, because they said end of January, early February, and January 30th, 31st, February 1st is all on the same weekend. So that intersection between January and February is on a weekend, so Thursday to Sunday. So potentially it looks like our first major this coming year could be starting on January 30th. So if that is the case, it's very possible we see the league, the qualifiers start at pretty much the exact same time. So in our case, it would likely be December 5th that the season would start. So a couple days earlier. See, but now where it gets interesting is the holiday break. The holiday break really is what makes this difficult to figure out. If we follow the same thing that happened last year, which is very likely that they'll just stick to what they did last year and that's what ended up being happening. You look here, December 17th, we had a qualifier right over here on the left. And then our next one wasn't until January 12th. So almost a month, right? Like three and a half weeks in between. I believe this was week 3 and week 4 of the qualifiers for Major 1. If they do the same thing, then our season will have to start in the early part of December. If they cut this break down to maybe 2 weeks, they could potentially start the season in the end of December, meaning that we would have, you know, maybe the last week of December, the first week of January, we have qualifiers, and then Major 1 is at the end of January, early February. So it could potentially only be 4 weeks. Last year was 5 weeks of qualifiers for Major 1. They could only do 4 this time around, but who really knows? So my personal best guess for this is going to be the Major will be held January 30th through February 2nd. That is the weekend that intersects between January and February. And the fact that everyone's saying end of January, early February, I feel like that weekend makes the most sense. I personally feel like it's most likely we'll start the first week of qualifiers in the beginning of December. Like I said, I believe I said December 5th was what I said. Probably December 6th is the Friday. So December 6th will likely be my best guess for when we actually start the season. But like I said, if they decide to do maybe less of a break for the holiday season, and maybe they only do 4 weeks of qualifiers, it is possible that we start a little later. Like I said right here in this tweet, if the event is the weekend of January 31st, they could do 5 weeks starting the end of December or 4 weeks starting the beginning of January. So there's really 2 options. It kind of depends how many weeks of qualifiers they do, and if they do another 3, almost 4 weeks of break for the holiday season in, you know, the second half of December and the first half of January. But you let me know, when do you think this season is going to start? I want it to start sooner rather than later, right? Obviously, I want this to start ASAP. I really don't want to have to wait months for the league to start, especially because ranked play is supposed to be coming out, I believe, before 2025. So you let me know, what do you think? When do you think the season is going to start? Is it going to start in the beginning of December? Do you think it's going to start more towards the end of December? Let me know in the comments. And also let me know, are you going to any of these events? I'll definitely be going to the Dallas event, as that is local to me. So hopefully I'll see some of you guys there. But yeah, with all that being said, make sure to sub for more CDL content, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.